Hello, and welcome to another edition of Coffee Talk with immigration attorney Brian D. Lerner. In this particular episode, I'd like to go over a little bit about the executive order from President Obama, the history of how this came about, how it might affect you and your family, what the at least the general provisions are, and essentially what can be done now, when things can be filed, and so forth. Um, First of all, let's go into a little bit of the history. As most of the immigration system is what they're referring to as broken. Lots of different problems. Millions of people that are in the U.S. without any path to anything, essentially, and there was basically in Congress all kinds of debates about, well, there had to be the enforcement side of immigration, meaning they had to increase security at the border, and we're talking the southern border. There had to be more penalties for people who tried to cross illegally, and then of course there's the affirmative side of it, where some people might qualify for different types of applications. People who've been here for a requisite number of years may be able to get on the path to becoming legal. They can come out of the shadows type thing. And so there was these two competing items, and the Senate, the U.S. Senate, in actuality, passed a bipartisan bill, a completely comprehensive immigration reform bill, which essentially, people on either side were not incredibly happy because both compromised, but they came out with a good bill. It went in front of when it was passed, it went to the House, and the House sat on it. They didn't do anything. Whether that was John Boehner's doing or not, it's unclear, but it was never brought up for a vote. It essentially, you had an approved immigration bill from the Senate, and it was just sitting on a table in the House, and they did nothing. And this happened about 16 months ago, about a year and a half ago. And basically, President Obama had waited what he considered to be long enough. And then, because the House would not take up the bill, would not let it go for a vote, he decided to issue his own executive orders, which I'm sure that there's going to be lots of controversy on in the future, but it is what it is, and he's issued it. And now, of course, it's a matter of preparing the various regulations and doing what's necessary in order to put these actions into effect. So he's done everything that he can do at this point without an immigration comprehensive reform package from Congress. And of course, if Congress, the House, the Senate, whatever, if they do want to put something in front of him to sign and negotiate and get something on the books as far as law goes, then the executive order at that point may no longer be necessary. But it is what it is now. And for those people watching who wonder if they're going to qualify, time here is somewhat of the essence for you. The executive order, without even knowing any of the provisions, which I'll go into in a few minutes, but the executive order will last just so long as President Obama is president. Now, it may carry over into the next presidency, but it may not. This is President Obama's second term. He's not going to get a third term by law. So for sure, there's going to be another president come 2 years from now. And if the president coming in as Republican, it is very likely that the executive order can and most likely will be revoked. If another Democratic president comes in, we don't know. The executive order may be amended. It's hard to see. It's hard to know. So what you want to do is you want to take this time that you have, and if you qualify, get in the doors, get it done, get it submitted. Now, if you come to my office or if you call, whatever, a free consultation to let you know if you qualify based on the information that we have so far. But I've been in this business for over 20 years. I've seen various occurrences where there's orders or there's laws that come in that affect a great number of people, and what happens, and I see this every time, what happens is a large number of people in the population who qualify wait until the last minute to go and apply, and many of them lose out. Many of them, by the time they decide to apply, it's gone. And so this is not something that will stay around forever. It has a very short life, possibly, and we're talking only about 2 years and maybe less, because when it gets enacted and when all the regulations are done, it is likely that there'll only be a year and a half left before President Obama no longer is in office. So if you have any possibility of qualifying, don't wait until the last minute, like I've unfortunately seen so many times over the last 20 years. Do what you need to do to get it done. And, if you get it done and it gets approved, it's not going to be revoked. Okay. I mean, even if the items in the executive order disappear in 2 years because there's another president, if you got it approved, it is highly unlikely that they're going to revoke anything that was previously approved per your petition. Okay, so that's the introductory statement, essentially. Now let's get into some of what it includes. Now keep in mind that I'm just summarizing the particular provisions, and that the actual regulations have not been issued yet. I'm sure that there's going to be um, various items in the regulations that may or may not change things, that may put wrinkles in it. But certainly, if you do more or less qualify, what can be started now is getting the documentation together, getting the package ready to be sent, and then when the exact regulations come out with the forms and all of those items, then we can just add to it, so make it complete, but at least the majority of it, evidence-wise, can be done. Now, as many of you probably know, the DACA, or the DREAM Act, or Deferred Action, however you want to call it, was made about 2 or 3 years ago, and it essentially applied to children, okay, or to people who came to the U.S. when, before they were 16, and they don't have essentially a criminal history, although there's some exceptions, and that by time they applied for the DACA, that they were, at that time, they were under 31 years of age. Well, and when you got the DACA, it was for 2 years. Well, the initiatives that President Obama first is talking about is expanding the population of people who are eligible for DACA. Okay, and what they're looking first is, instead of giving a 2-year eligibility window for the work permit before you have to apply again, expanding that to 3 years. So that's a pretty decent increase right there. But then the real expansion of DACA is that President Obama is stating that he will allow parents of U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents who have been in the country since January 1st, 2010, to request the deferred action and employment authorization for 3 years. And that'll be called the Deferred Action for Parental Accountability Program. And so, obviously there's going to be issues, if you have criminal history and all of that. But even if you have a criminal history, if you come to my office, maybe we can make a motion to vacate or reduce it so that you'd still be eligible for this parent DACA. And this is a very decent step, because I can't tell you how many times I had people come into my office who, the parents just wanted the best for their kids, and so they got their kids DACA, but of course they were just sitting there illegally without any hope of anything at the time. And so this would take care of that situation. So essentially, the whole family can get DACA. Now, next, President Obama has stated that he will expand the provisional waiver program. Now, if you know about the provisional waiver program, that is essentially where, let's just, I'll give you an easy example. You marry a U.S. citizen, but you don't qualify to adjust status in the U.S. for various reasons, and ultimately you have to leave the U.S. And the moment you leave, you're subject to the 3 to 10 year bar, which means you can't come back for 10 years unless a waiver is approved. Well, the provisional waiver, for all intents and purposes, says you can apply for it while waiting in the U.S., assuming it's approved. Then when you have to go out to the consulate, you go out, you show your approved provisional waiver, and assuming there's no other issues, you essentially turn back around from the interview with your green card and come right back in without having to be separated from your family. Well, the issue that was difficult as it stands is that you could only do, I mean, minus some other issues, but you could only do a provisional waiver if the spouse and or parent was a U.S. citizen, and you had to show hardship to them. And so that was, it was very limiting, because what happens if you don't have a parent or a spouse that's a U.S. citizen? What if they're lawful permanent resident? What if the relationship is not the very narrow relationship already defined? And so the provisional waivers, President Obama wants to expand those to include the sons and daughters of U.S. citizens and the spouse and sons or daughters of lawful permanent residents. So that is good that it now is going to include lawful permanent residents in addition to citizens, because there's a lot of people who fall into that category and who need to show hardship to their spouse, except before had to be a U.S. citizen. So that's a good increase in the provisional waivers. It'll allow a lot more people qualify in order to go forward. Now, what else? Okay, well, there are various employment-based visas that will be available. Ones that essentially, as they put it, as President Obama put it, to grow our economy and create jobs. And this one here is a little ambiguous as to what exactly is going to be done. But at least initially, the orders are that USCIS they're going to work with Department of State to develop a method of allocating the immigrant visas. Going to work with the Visa Bulletin, and then there's going to be a clarification of the standard by which a national interest waiver may be granted to foreign investors or inventors, researchers, and founders of startup enterprises to benefit the U.S. economy. So I can tell you right now that a national interest waiver for those people who are interested in employment visas, for all intents and purposes, it means that if what you do benefits the national interest of the United States, then you don't have to go through the whole PERM process, which takes years and years. And I know that most of you are sitting out there saying, well, what on earth can qualify for a national interest waiver? And I agreed, it is quite limiting, and we had to make very creative arguments. But it looks like they're going to be able to fully expand considerably the national interest waiver to make it so it's much more realistic to people who invest in the businesses and so forth. So we'll have to see how that comes. Also, there are people who are waiting long times to do adjustment of status. And right now, there's certain portability provisions, but President Obama's executive order is essentially going to remove unnecessary restrictions and make it easier to go through the natural career progressions to transfer and not lose the adjustment that you may be waiting year after year for. And then also, there are there's orders that authorize parole, and that means to be able to come in the U.S. on a case-by-case basis to eligible inventors, researchers, founders who may not even qualify for a national interest waiver yet, but may in the future. And so there's different ways of showing that, which they've listed a few, such as they hold the promise of innovation and job creation through the development of new technologies or the pursuit of cutting edge research. And there's all kinds of people out there that are entrepreneurs who can fall under that category. And then there's going to provide a work authorization for spouses of certain H-1B visa holders who are on the path to lawful permanent residency. As of right now, an H-4, which is the spouse of an H-1B, they have no authorization to work. So this will be good for all the H-1B people. And then they're looking to expand the optional practical training program. That's after you come here on an F1, get a degree, and you usually get about a year to go on OPT. So they're looking to expand that in order to allow, I assume, a clearer, easier path for employment. And then you might have heard the L1B. That's an intercompany transferee, someone who has specialized knowledge. It has been going through the ringer as far as the last few years on getting approved. I mean, there's been adjudications that in one area are completely different than another. There've been misinterpretation of the regulations to allow it, and so there's been obviously it got up to this executive order that there's been a lot of problems on it. So now there's going to be providing clear, consolidated guidance of the meaning of specialized knowledge and so forth. Now, the other issue, which this isn't really adding to it, but they're going to promote the naturalization process. Okay, so they'll promote public education and awareness for lawful permanent residents who can become U.S. citizens. They'll allow fees to now be paid by credit card. So, if you just want to put it on your credit card and not have to worry about the payments for a while, that'll be allowed. So that should make it easier for people. So some of the issues are, when is all this going to go into effect? And some of it is going to be within 6 months. Some of it'll be when the regulations are drafted. Some of it's going to be within 90 days. It depends. But again, what I would suggest is that you do what's necessary in order to get the package put together. Get to an attorney. Again, you can call my office. We'll let you know what can be done, and at least we can start preparing, depending on what provision of the executive order you want to come for. You can start preparing the package in order that when the regulations do come out and the official comes out, that it's virtually ready to go, minus the forms and specifics that are not yet in the package. This has been just a summation of the executive order from President Obama. It's good to see that things on the immigration front are moving forward. There's a lot of people who are going to qualify for this. Don't let this pass you by. Don't think this is permanent, and do what you can to make it happen for yourself. Okay, more on the coming videos.